cool sequence that you can do from the healing side of things. So this is if you're looking for like a really big burst of AoE healing in a short amount of time, is you basically summon two ancestors and then you use a string of abilities all within the two ancestor window that's going to make them cast a ton of chain heals, right? And so basically what we're going to do here is we're going to cast Unleash Life and then Ancestral Swiftness to summon our ancestors. And then we're going to use our Cloudburst Totem, which is going to make them each chain heal, Healing Rain, which is going to make them each chain heal, Downpour, which is going to make them each chain heal, and then two chain heals, which are also going to make them each chain heal, for a total of 10 ancestor chain heals in what's like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 seconds, which is pretty cool. And that's all in addition to the healing that you're doing, right? So if I wanted to do that window, I would do Unleash Life, Ancestral Swiftness, Cloudburst Totem, Healing Rain, Chain Heal, Downpour, Chain Heal. And that was 10 Ancestor Chain Heals right there. And then, whatever else you can scrounge up through Riptides and Healing Surges and whatever. Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Shamrocked. This is a video guide for the Farseer hero talent tree for Restoration Shaman in the War Within. Okay, so I'm just going to get into it. So if you've been following my channel at all over the last few weeks, you'll know that I've mostly been playing Totemic in the beta testing. I actually do right now like Totemic a bit more. And it's nothing to do with the throughput or anything like that. It's really just for me the style of Totemic. I think it's really fun. I think it's really different than what we've been doing for the past couple of years. But that being said, I also find Farseer really enjoyable. I think that we have two amazing hero talent trees. We probably are in one of the best spots out of all the classes and specs in terms of what we have, what was given to us and what we have to offer to a group with both hero trees. So that is really fantastic. And if you're curious about whether you want to go Totemic or Farseer, like you're having trouble picking which one, I do encourage you to try out both. But I also have another video on my channel where I kind of just go through the benefits, the pros and cons of both trees, and which content and what your play style might lend to for what you might enjoy more. So with that being said, I'm not going to be debating like which one is better in this video. I'm just going to be talking about when I play Farseer, this is how I would play it. And then, as I said before, I haven't played Farseer as much as I've played Totemic, but I have played it quite a bit. So I do somewhat know what I'm talking about. But that being said, when people when some of the other Shaman streamers that you maybe like come out with other Farseer videos, you may want to check them out as well, because they'll probably hit some points that I maybe don't. But if you're just looking for a place to start, I think I can give you a few tips that will help make your gameplay a little bit better, as well as maybe open your eyes to some of the different ways you can approach Farseer. So to start, I think what's really interesting about Farseer, a little bit compared to Totemic, is that I think in terms of Mythic Plus, by the way, this video is pretty much just Mythic Plus only, so don't take what I'm saying to your raid. But for Mythic Plus, I think it's really interesting that Farseer has little to no customization in the actual hero tree, but a ton of choices and customization in your spec tree. Whereas I think Totemic was the opposite. Totemic had a few interesting choices in your hero tree that you can switch between depending on the dungeon, the situation, and you're still going to get good value out of whichever one you pick. But I feel like the spec talents for Totemic are very rigid. There's not a whole lot you can do. And one of the coolest things about Farseer, I think, is that you can really lean into a single target focused build versus an AoE healing focused build, which for Totemic, I feel like you don't get that freedom, because Totemic is really mostly just about AoE healing. It doesn't have like an ace ability that's going to help it with the single target throughput, which Farseer has a lot of. So just to go through the hero talent tree itself really quickly. So you have the first one here called the Ancestors. So this is going to make it so when you benefit from Undulation or Unleash Life, it's going to call an Ancestor that will do healing or damage based on what you're doing. So to back up a bit, basically the point of the Ancestor tree, and once again, this is covered extensively in my Totemic versus Farseer tree, but you basically summon allies, ancestors that will help you out. And the best way to think about it is they're just going to enhance what you do. So if you're healing single target, they're going to help you heal single target. If you're healing AoE, they're going to help you do that. And then same thing for damage. If you're doing single target damage, they will amplify that. And if you're doing AoE damage, they will amplify that as well. So they really just take what you're doing and make it stronger. The one drawback to that with Farseer though is that the ancestors aren't the smartest healers in the world. So for instance, if you're in a raid, and thanks to Thune for pointing this out in his video, but and doing the testing that he does, but they'll target pets a lot with their chain heals, which is just not good. I'm assuming that will be fixed because that's a pretty big oversight on Blizzard's part if they want this tree to be effective as effective as it could be in raid. But yeah, they're just not the smartest healers, so they'll target pets sometimes. They won't target like lowest health party members all the time, and it's just you can't really control who they're healing, which I think is the one big drawback with Farseer. I think if there was a way to control that, it would be much more in line with Totemic in terms of the AoE healing it could do. But yeah, once again, if you want to know, toe to toe, which ones do more throughput or are better for your raid, or which ones are more beginner friendly or whatever, just go check out the other video I made. But yeah, so sorry, continuing with the hero tree. The next row, I'll just go through row by row. You have a choice talent between Latent Wisdom, which is your ancestor spells are 20% more powerful. Ancient Fellowship, ancestors have a 20% chance to call another ancestor for 10 seconds when they expire. The difference between these two mainly is, one, you're summoning ancestors that are more powerful. In my opinion, they're more reliable. Whereas the other one, you just have a chance to call more ancestors, which is sort of a gamble, but also equally, or if not more powerful when it does proc. He might call ancestors last an additional 4 seconds, and then you have routine communication, which makes it so Riptide has a 15% chance to call an ancestor. So this is just like the other talent in the sense that you have one, which is giving you guaranteed reliability, which is, your ancestors just flat out last longer. And then you have one that's more of a gamble, more of a casino game style, right? So Riptide has a chance to call an ancestor. So if you roll high, you could have several ancestors at once. But if you roll low, then you won't. So yeah, it's kind of a gamble. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Next, you have Elemental Reverb. So Lava Burst and Riptide each gain an additional charge and heal for 5% more. Offering from Beyond, when an ancestor is called, they reduce the cooldown of Riptide by 2 seconds. So as you can see as I'm going through this is very Riptide centric, which is great in its own way. Next is Primordial Capacity, which increases your mana by 5% and allows you more tidal wave stacks. And I'll just do a quick note there that the additional tidal wave stacks is very nice with the current tier set for this season. Because that is just amplifying what your tidal waves do. So this Farseer synergizes much better with your tier set bonus than Totemic would. You also have Spirit Walker's Momentum, so using spells while you have Spirit Walker's Grace will increase the duration of that, which is pretty cool. Next one, you have Natural Harmony and Earthen Communication. Natural Harmony will reduce the cooldown of Nature's Guardian by 15 seconds and cause it to heal for an additional 10% of your maximum health. Just a reminder, Nature's Guardian is this sort of mini bootleg cheat death that shamans get. So when your health is brought below 35% health, you instantly heal for 30% of your maximum health. It cannot occur more than once for every 30 seconds. So basically you're allowing this to happen every 15 seconds. Yeah, every 15 seconds instead of every 30, and it's going to heal for a bit more. The other choice here is Earthen Communion, which just gives Earth Shield additional 3 charges and heals you for 25% more. Both of these are really strong. I think in like a raid situation, the Earthen Communion will equal more HPS value, like it's just going to be more numbers, so you'd likely choose that. But I think in Mythic Plus, the mini cheat death value is far superior than having additional Earth Shield charges that heal a bit more, because you're usually casting Earth Shield. Other shamans who play Mythic Plus, like you're basically casting Earth Shield in all of your downtime, so that's never really a problem. I think in raid, it's a much bigger problem because you're going large amounts of time in a certain fight, whereas Mythic Plus, it's more stop go. So I think for Mythic Plus, my personal pick would be Natural Harmony. I think that's a much better talent. Next, you have Maelstrom's Supremacy, which increases the healing done by Healing Wave, Healing Surge, Wellspring, Downpour, and Chain Heal. So basically all of your major heals by 8%. It's pretty huge. And then Final Calling, when an ancestor expires, they cast Hydro Bubble on a nearby injured ally. This is just a protective shield that sort of decays over time. In terms of effectiveness, Hydro Bubble, and I talked about this in my Totemic versus Farseer video, Hydro Bubble is basically the same as Wind Barrier. They do it's not nothing, but their healing / shield value is pretty negligible. It's like 1% of your overall healing throughout a key, or maybe 2%. So it's nothing, you don't have to worry about this one. It's really just a passive ability that's nice to have. And then finally, the capstone talent is Ancestral Swiftness. So your next healing or damaging spell is instant and costs no mana and deals 10% increased damage and healing. So this is basically Nature Swiftness, but on a shorter cooldown. Cooldown's cut in half. It used to be a minute, now it's 30 seconds. And it also increases the effectiveness of whatever spell you use it on by 10%, which is pretty great. So taking all of those hero talents into account, it already sort of, like if you're following along, it really forms the playstyle for Farseer in your head, right? You're summoning allies that help you, and all of your natural spells have increased effectiveness. You have more mana, and you have Ancestral Swiftness, which allows you to free cast instantly with no mana cost a spell every 30 seconds. And basically the feedback loop is, you summon ancestors and then you have more powerful spells that they are also amplifying by casting their spells. So really, it's just a very powerful build in terms of what you can do throughput, but it does require a little bit of finesse and a little bit of expertise. And I think the best way to describe it, at least for me, is that Farseer really leans on like traditional shaman healing. So if you have already been playing shaman for a long time, you know what you're doing, you're probably going to be really good at Farseer right off the bat, because it really just takes what you're doing and makes it better. The only thing you really have to worry about is plugging in to your rotation the abilities that summon ancestors. All right, and so actually that's a good segue into the topic of summoning ancestors. So you can either do it via Undulation or Unleash Life. I know this is crazy because we've been using Undulation in Mythic Plus through all of Dragonflight. It's been one of our main tools because of its interaction with P-Wave, Primordial Wave. But from my practicing, like from the feely craft, if you will, from what I've been doing, having Unleash Life, although somewhat awkward in a Mythic Plus, it takes a little bit to get used to, but it's actually, it's not bad. Having the control of when your ancestor gets summoned and having it last longer, so the Unleash Life ancestor lasts 16 seconds, whereas the Undulation lasts 10 seconds, is really incredible for being able to plan out your ancestor healing windows for high damage windows during boss fights or trash or whatever. I guess the best way to look at it would be to see, like, with Undulation, your ancestors last less time, but you're getting more of them. I don't think there's ever the situation where you're going to have like 4 ancestors up, because you'd have to be like spamming Undulation or spamming Healing Surge over and over and over, which there's really not a situation where you would be doing that much to summon like a ton of ancestors. But really, I think the best way to look at it is if you're running Undulation, you're going to have 2 ancestors more often, but you can't really control when it happens as much. And every so often you'll have 3 ancestors for a little bit of time. If you're using Unleash Life, you have far more control over your double ancestor windows, although they may not happen as often, but they're also going to last longer, right? So given that Ancestral Swiftness summons an ancestor and can be cast every 30 seconds, and that Unleash Life summons an ancestor and can be cast every 15 seconds, which is the cooldown for that, you basically every 30 seconds, you have guaranteed 2 ancestors. And because the ancestor by Unleash Life lasts 16 seconds and the cooldown is only 15 seconds, theoretically, you could have a ancestor up throughout an entire dungeon if you hit that button on cooldown. So realistically, you're thinking about it throughout a whole key. With Unleash Life, you have an ancestor helping you the entire time, and every 15 seconds, you get a second ancestor to help you out. So you really want to capitalize around your 2 ancestor window for big damage, events that are happening for bosses or trash. And then otherwise, you just have your 1 ancestor helping you out the whole time. So really, when you think about that, you want to synergize your big combos and your cooldowns and your modifiers during those windows where you have 2 ancestors, assuming that you're planning around damage events that are coming out. So before we move on to the actual spec talents to talk about, I really just want to touch on something that's very important, I feel like, for Farseer and Mythic Plus. And that is whether or not to take the talents that increase power and increase longevity of your ancestors, rather than the talents that increase by chance the amount of ancestors you have. So for Mythic Plus, I think one of the main differences between Mythic Plus play and Raid play as a healer is you're responsible for your group solely. In terms of, like, there's no other healer that's going to come in and save you if you make a mistake or you're not able to keep up. If you can't keep up or you're unable to do what you need to do, your group's going to die and the key is not going to get timed, and it's unfortunately your fault, right? So if you're trying to push those high end keys and you want to do top content, you need to be a healer that your group and yourself can rely on. And in order to do that, you need to have talents and abilities that you can rely on. And unfortunately, the RNG abilities, although a little bit better for a raid when you have like an average over a long amount of time and you have other healers who can pick up when you're not doing the most healing, for Mythic Plus, RNG talents are just not it. Because here's the thing. If you know a damage window is coming out, just like in a raid, like you plan for boss abilities. You go into it knowing what you're going to cast ahead of time. And, you know, one thing that separates the really good players from the average players are players who can adapt on the fly when things don't go as planned. But all players in Mythic Plus, all good players, have a plan, right? So in order to have a plan, you need to be able to rely on what is going to happen on your end. You know, you need to be able to depend on what you can do. And so, unfortunately, if you're running the Ancient Fellowship and the routine communications, you can't 100% rely on things being the way you need them to be in order to heal a certain damage check, right? Like you may roll high and get a ton of ancestors out when you need them and breeze through the damage check much more than you would if you were running the other talents. But it's also just as likely that you're not going to have the ancestors up when you need them, and then you're not going to be able to meet that damage check at all, right? So you want to be able to know what you're going to be doing, and Latent Wisdom, which makes your ancestor spells more powerful all the time, and Heed My Call, which makes your ancestors last an additional 4 seconds all the time. Those are talents you can depend on, and they're ones that really lend themselves to having a plan, right? So if you're planning on running Mythic Plus content and going high end, I strongly suggest that you take the Heed My Call and the Latent Wisdom talents over the other RNG ones. That being said, if you're not pushing high end content, maybe you're pushing low to mid high, and you just want to have fun with as many ancestors as you possibly can, then, you know, by all means run the other talents. I think you'll probably have more fun that way anyways. But if you're just really looking to push as high content as you can and be that dependable healer that your group can count on, you're probably going to gravitate towards the Latent Wisdom and Heed My Call talents. And so with that out of the way, let's talk about some of these spec talents and how they synergize with the Farseer tree. This is probably the typical build I would run for Mythic Plus for Farseer, and it's actually the build that I was running when I was practicing on beta, and I found it very effective and very enjoyable too. The only thing I dislike with Farseer compared to Totemic, and I think it's just, well, two things. One is, like I said, the playstyle is very much what we've already been doing. So a draw for Totemic for me was that it was different. But second was that it feels like you're pressing a lot more buttons for Farseer because you're trying to keep a lot of Riptides on cooldowns. And you're also making sure that you put into your rotation those abilities that summon ancestors, right? Your Unleash Life and your Ancestral Swiftness. So it feels like you're pressing a lot more buttons with Farseer. And that can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but just like any rotation with any class and any spec, once you figure it out and you get the hang of it, it's not that big of a deal, right? So if it's something that you dislike at first, try to power through and get used to it before you decide that you don't like Farseer forever. Because trust me, once you get used to it, it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it as much, and you get better with it. It's going to feel much better for you. All right, so going into the spec talents, I'm just going to go through the key ones here that I think are just, you know, important for Farseer. So first you have Cloudburst Totem versus Healing Stream. Healing Stream Totem, although much more effective than it used to be and much more in line with Cloudburst Totem, I don't think Healing Stream will be as effective to Farseer players as it is to Totemic players, obviously because of the reactivity talent for Totemic, which buffs Healing Stream. But that is to say that I think for Totemic, higher end content, you can get away with Healing Stream. But for Farseer, I feel like Healing Stream is going to very much have a harsh drop off when you get to higher end content. It's just not going to be able to keep up. But I mean, I'm sure there are shamans out there that are still going to do it. But I think if you're looking for the easier and more efficient route, if you're playing Farseer, learn how to play Cloudburst. It's going to make your life easier. Master of the Elements. So Farseer leans very heavily into Healing Surge, a lot more than Totemic, I would say. So Master of the Elements is just going to really help you out with that. So make sure you take that talent and really learn how to lean into it and make your Healing Surges that much more effective. Next, we have Flow of the Tides or Ancestral Reach, which, let me back up a second. So for Farseer, I think you can do Riptide builds that like don't have, I hate using that word, but anyways, a Riptide build And the reason I hate it is because all builds you use Riptide, no matter what shaman you're playing, and they use it on cooldown. But the non-chain heal build is basically a build that doesn't do chain heal, and it really leans heavily into healing surge, primordial wave and healing wave, riptides, and then just all of that being supplemented by your ancestor healing, and then really leaning into using cloudburst effectively as well. I think a Riptide build, like a no chain heal build for Farseer, is a much higher skill cap than using a chain heal build. So if you're new to the spec, try both, see what you enjoy, but I feel like you're going to have an easier time with a chain heal build just because chain heal offers on-demand instant throughput. It's more reactive. Non-chain heal builds require a lot of planning and they require a lot of expertise. The most of the shamans who make non-chain heal builds work throughout pretty much all of Dragonflight, and I'm assuming it's going to be the similar with Farseer, are like the best of the best, like the shamans who know exactly what they're doing. They know the math behind everything. They've been playing forever. They're the ones who can really make use of that. So, and that's not to insult anyone. I just think that if you're a new player, you're going to have a much easier time with chain heal. And even if you're an old player, like chain heal, for me personally, I know some shamans don't like it, but I find it fun to use. I think it's like one of the pillars of the spec, and it has been since its existence. So yeah, there's kind of two separate builds. So one with chain heal, one without. So this one I'm talking about the one with chain heal, obviously. So if you're doing the build with chain heal, you're going to take Ancestral Reach or Flow of the Tides. Ancestral Reach just flat out increases the healing done by chain heal by 8% and increases its jump by one player, so it's going to hit everybody in the 5-man dungeon. And then you have Flow of the Tides. This is a little bit more interesting, but once again, it's one of those ones that has a bit of a higher skill cap. So if you're using chain heal and you cast it on a target that has Riptide, it's going to eat up that Riptide and increase the healing of your chain heal by 30%. And it also makes chain heal bounce an additional time. So whether you take Flow of the Tides or Ancestral Reach, your chain heal in Mythic Plus will be hitting everybody, which is amazing. And that's a change they made at some point in Dragonflight. But basically, using Flow of the Tides is really, really effective with Farseer. I think it's far more effective than it's ever been throughout Dragonflight, just because Farseer has insane amounts of Riptide, especially if you're using Echo of the Elements and running the 3 Riptide charges. But even if you're not, just because your Riptide cooldown is shorter because of the hero tree, because of the which talent is it? Sorry, this one, because whenever your ancestors are called, they're reducing your Riptide cooldown by 2 seconds. You just have far more Riptides out. And if you're using Primal Tide Core, which we can now take very easily compared to in Dragonflight, Flow of the Tides is looking incredible. And if you haven't tried this talent out, I encourage you to do so, because the throughput that you can get with Flow of the Tides chain heals that are also buffed by High Tide is like insane. It's huge numbers, and it just feels very nice. And it also fills Cloudburst Totem, so it's just like win all around. So I'd suggest, if you are not brand new to the spec, have a little bit of expertise and want to play around with your Riptides, run Flow of the Tides. If you're a little bit new or just don't want to think about that, and just want some more consistent throughput, just use Ancestral Reach. It's also equally as good. Obviously, as I talked about, I would choose Unleash Life for Mythic Plus, just because it gives you more control over when you're using your ancestors. It gives you those 2 ancestor windows very easily at your fingertips. However, Undulation is still very strong. It does work with Primordial Wave. In fact, they actually just fixed it last night, so now you don't even have to worry about the weird 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3 stacks for Undulation. You just do it when you have it, which is really nice. And it now affects both the Healing Wave and the Cleaves. So it actually turns Primordial Wave into a bit of a better single target heal than it was. However, Farseer is not really lacking for single target heals, so it's not as big a deal. But anyways, Unleash Life. This is cool. Like I said, most Mythic Plus shamans won't be used to using this, so if you are, take another look at what it does for each spell. You're most likely going to be using it on chain heals, healing rains, and maybe like a Riptide or a Healing Tide or a Healing Wave or Healing Surge if you need to. But probably Chain Heal and Healing Rain are your most value. Healing Rain, it affects 2 additional targets, which you might think, why would you even bother? Because you only have 5 targets in a Mythic Plus. But it also affects Acid Rain as well, as far as I know. So you're going to be doing more damage if you do it that way. And if you combo it with Ancestral Swiftness, you're going to be doing more damage and healing with your with your healing rain, acid rain, and it's going to be affecting 2 more targets with acid rain. So it's a nice combo. But yeah, just unleash life, play around with it. Like I said, if you're not used to using this, just put it into your rotation and just play around, see what spells you like using it on. But once again, you're probably going to get the most value out of like a chain heal that's buffed by High Tide than anything else. All right, next we have Echo of the Elements. So this is interesting because this traditionally has been a talent that you always take no matter what, whether you're a Raid Shaman or a Mythic Plus Shaman, whatever. But because we have the Elemental Reverb, which gives Lava Burst and Riptide an additional charge, Echo of the Elements really isn't needed if you're used to that 2 Riptide, 2 Lava Burst playstyle, and if you're happy with that. You can actually take this talent out and put it into like Current Control or Torrent, really whichever one you feel like you're going to get the most use out of. Personally, I was having a lot of fun having 3 charges, not only of Riptide, but of Lava Burst. That's one thing I love about Farseer is the damage. When you have damage windows that you're able to like actually sit there and spend globals on damage, the damage it pumps out is insane. And it just looks really cool because you have, these comrades, these buddies beside you that are just like pumping lava bursts and chain lightnings into things. And it just looks really cool. It's very visually satisfying. But yeah, so Echo of the Elements, take this or don't take this. I think you should actually try both. See how you feel with 3 charges of Riptide and 3 charges of Lava Burst. Maybe that will really enhance your playstyle, but maybe it won't. Maybe you're totally fine with 2. However, I will just mention that having 3 really does synergize nicely with the Flow of the Tides talent, obviously. I think also if you're talking about having 3 charges of Riptide and Lava Burst, you don't want to get caught up, like mentally fixated on, casting Riptide on cooldown and never having a charge up. I think that's a mistake that some shamans will run into with 3 charges. Just get it out on the group. Make sure you have it ready for when you're going into damage windows and whatnot. But you don't focus too hard on this. Think of it as a bonus for like it's there when you need it. Because the talents that you're getting instead of this, like I said, either Current Control, Torrent, Spouting Spirits, if you're running one of the other 2 already, Mana Tide Totem, like these aren't amazing talents, right? So it's not like you're giving up a lot to have Echo of the Elements. Next we have the Ancestral. Okay, you can take APT here, which is Ancestral Protection Totem. You take Earthen Wall Totem, or you can take Earth Living Weapon in order to spec down into Earthen Harmony. So I would say take any of these. If you're not specking into Earthen Harmony, and I'll talk about that in a bit, you can actually take this point out and then you could put that into, Current Control or Torrent. Any of those. I actually think if you don't know how to use Ancestral Protection Totem, then that is probably, your best bang for your buck would probably be Torrent, or if you really want that 2-minute healing tide, you can put it into that as well. But if you are someone who enjoys the value of Ancestral Protection Totem and you know how to use it, I do strongly advise. I don't strongly advise. I think it's something that's worth taking, and it's very nice to have for Mythic Plus. It also, the nice thing about Ancestral Protection Totem is when you pull it off, especially when it's like unexpected, you look and feel like an absolute hero. So I do advise playing around with that. For Earthen Wall Totem, I don't think you don't really get any value out of this in a Mythic Plus. Like even if you're using every single absorb that it does, it's 15,000 damage. Like it's nothing. Most of the absorb is going to come from whatever the tank is getting hit by, and that, trust me, that 15,000 is not doing anything for them. If your totem wasn't blocking that, they would be healing it up naturally with their own normal tank abilities. So yeah, I would just say don't even bother looking at Earthen Wall Totem. If you really want something that you don't want to think about and you're looking for a way to get into Earthen Harmony, then probably go Earth Living Weapon, because that's just going to be healing that is going to happen automatically and you don't have to think about it. Just make sure if you do spec into Earth Living Weapon that you also take Enhanced Imbues. But as it is with Farseer, Earth Living Weapon is not ever going to be doing a ton of healing on your group. So I think your choice is really, if you want to go into Earthen Harmony, your one choice, if you're really trying to be a master shaman and you're really trying to push that high-end content, is probably APT. But once again, if you don't want to take Earthen Harmony, then you can really, flex this point into Current Control, Torrent, and you can switch it up depending on what dungeon you're doing. Okay, so Earthen Harmony, let's just talk about that because I've kind of mentioned it. So Earthen Harmony reduces damage taken by anybody with Earth Shield, so yourself and one other, assuming you're running Elemental Orbit, which you should be. It's going to make you take 5% less damage, and it also increases the healing. So this is really for your tank mostly. It is for you as well. This season, from all of my beta testing, there's not really a ton, hardly any abilities you have to worry about one-shotting you. So if you remember, if you played Dragonflight, like almost all seasons of Dragonflight had a few bosses where you had to worry about this ability that could one-shot you. I don't see a lot of that currently in this season, so you don't have to worry about that as much. However, 5% DR is really incredible for a tank throughout a whole dungeon, and the increased healing it does is really incredible as well. I think the only nice thing about Farseer, if you didn't take Earthen Harmony compared to Totemic, is that Farseer has a ton of single target healing. So you're not really missing that extra healing from Earthshield as much as if you were in Totemic and not taking this ability. But the reason I'm even discussing whether or not to take Earthen Harmony, and I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit, is if you're running a chain heal build, there's really no spot to take Downpour if you're running Earthen Harmony. Your only other flex talent that you could take out is Tidebringer, or I guess you could take out Primordial Wave as well. But I think if you're looking at Primordial Wave versus Downpour, I don't know, the value, it's kind of hard to say because Downpour with Farseer, remember, you're only getting a 6-second window to cast it, which is very small. So it requires a very high skill cap to play this correctly. You have to have a very good idea in your head of timings for damage and all that stuff in order to really make use of Downpour. However, Downpour is an ability that makes your ancestors cast a chain heal, right? So there is value in that. So I think unless you're running the highest end content, in which case you're probably making your own builds anyways, so you're not watching this. I think if you're running low to mid to even mid-high content, you don't need to worry about Earthen Harmony that much. I think you'd have a lot more fun if you just stuck with all three, Tidebringer, Downpour, and Primordial Wave. Because those are all very, very quality of life abilities to have. And like I said, Earthen Harmony really only helps both the tank and yourself for those really, really high-end the high-end content where you're really pushing the limit of what a class can do. So with that being said, I do advise if you're playing Chain Heal build for Farseer that you go Tidebringer. It's just going to make your life a lot easier, a lot more fun. With Farseer, you don't have to worry about mana that much, right? So Tidebringer is not that detrimental. For Totemic, I think Tidebringer is a trap because it's going to encourage you to hard cast Chain Heals, and that's going to deplete your mana. But for Farseer, you just have more mana to work with, and your spells are all just like a little bit more effective. So you're not spamming as much as you might be with Totemic. So yeah, I think Tidebringer is really cool for Farseer if you're running Chain Heal. It's going to make your Chain Heals fast. It's going to make them bounce very far. You don't ever have to worry about range. And it's going to give you quick reactive healing. I think that's the biggest difference between Tidebringer and no Tidebringer is just how reactive your Chain Heals can be. How much planning you have to do in advance, and how effective can you be when something happens that you're not expecting or that you're just not prepared for. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I guess Ancestral Awakening is nice healing. They buffed it quite a bit. It is decent. High Tide is a must if you're running Chain Heal. It makes everything so much more powerful. Ascendance is a must for Mythic Plus. First Ascendant and Preeminence, take whichever one you want. It really, this is one you might swap on the dungeon depending. And then Downpour, like I just talked about. I think Downpour is really cool to have, and I'm gonna detail a sequence out in a second that involves Downpour that makes Farseer really cool. But basically, yeah, I would say take Downpour if you're not so concerned about having Earthen Harmony. But if you are, you can absolutely sacrifice Downpour if you find yourself not using it or not knowing how to use it, or maybe you just don't like it. You could take this point out and then put it into Earthen Harmony, and it's going to be equal, if not better value, but maybe a little bit less fun to use. And then we have Primordial Wave. So Primal Tide Core I think is really cool for Farseer, especially if you're playing Flow of the Tides. It's just going to give you extra Riptides. Tidewaters, also very nice. You are still casting Healing Rain on cooldown with Farseer, so you're going to be getting a lot of value out of Tidewaters, especially because you are most likely going to have Riptide on the entire group pretty much all the time. And then Primordial Wave. I think Primordial Wave is a bit of a contested talent point in the sense that some shamans just don't like it, and I think that's totally fine. So if you don't like playing with this, then don't bother. You can actually take this point and you can put it anywhere else, including, like I said, Earthen Harmony, and then you don't even have to worry about losing Downpour. But I do think Primordial Wave for 1 point, especially if you're already taking Tidewaters and Primal Tide Core, is huge value. And it also does work with Unleash Life. So even though you're not running Undulation and getting that benefit from Primordial Wave, you can actually use Unleash Life with it as well. So yeah, that's basically what I would run for a chain heal build, and this is what I would run. I wouldn't run a non-chain heal build. I will go through one in a second just so you have it, but this is what I would recommend. Okay, if I have a clip from when I've been playing on beta, I will put it up. I've hopefully put at least a few clips up while I've been talking anyways, just to show a little bit of the gameplay style. But here is an example of what you could do. So if you watch my totemic video, I kind of went through what a surging totem or surge window would look like. I'm going to do the same thing for Farseer. So for Farseer, you could have, like I said, 2 ancestor windows, right? Where you are able to summon 2 ancestors at once and then really just like go ham with whatever spells you're casting. So keep in mind for ancestors, if you cast an AoE heal, they will each cast a less powerful chain heal that bounces to that hits 3 targets. If you cast a single target heal, they're going to cast a healing surge that's at like 50% effectiveness on the target that you're hitting, I believe it is. And if you and then for damage, if you're doing single target damage like lightning bolt or lava burst, they're going to cast a lava burst. And if you do an AoE damaging spell, which I believe is only chain lightning that we have, they're also going to cast a chain lightning as well. So with that being said, you can imagine if you're doing like a 2 ancestor window, you kind of want to really capitalize on a sequence of casts that's going to make your ancestors do the most. You want to put these guys to work when they're out there, right? Cool sequence that you can do from the healing side of things. So this is if you're looking for like a really big burst of AoE healing in a short amount of time, is you basically summon 2 ancestors and then you use a string of abilities all within the 2 ancestor window that's going to make them cast a ton of chain heals, right? And so basically what we're going to do here is we're going to cast Unleash Life and then Ancestral Swiftness to summon our ancestors, and then we're going to use our Cloudburst Totem, which is going to make them each chain heal, Healing Rain, which is going to make them each chain heal, Downpour, which is going to make them each chain heal, and then 2 chain heals, which are also going to make them each chain heal, for a total of 10 ancestor chain heals in what's like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 seconds, which is pretty cool. And that's all in addition to the healing that you're doing, right? So if I wanted to do that window, I would do Unleash Life, Ancestral Swiftness, Cloudburst Totem, Healing Rain, Chain Heal, Downpour, Chain Heal. And that was 10 ancestor chain heals right there. And then, you know, whatever else you can scrounge up through Riptides and healing surges and whatever. And that right there is a nice big window. So with those kind of things, that's kind of what you're going to be doing. You're going to be putting your ancestors to work with strings of abilities. So on the DPS like side of things, you can imagine basically the same thing, but instead of, you know, chain heals and healing rains and whatever, you're casting your chain lightnings, right? So what I would do for a damage Farseer window is I would basically do the same thing. I do Unleash Life, Ancestral Swiftness, put my healing rain down on the enemies, and then I would just go into chain heals or chain lightning spam, right? And you can just see how awesome that looks with these little buddies like going in and just like attacking with you. It just looks so cool. And then on that same thing, instead of doing chain lightning, if you were doing a single target DPS, you could just do lava bursts instead, and these guys are going to cast lava bursts as well. And once again, just looks really cool and does a lot of damage. The only thing that's hard about damage for Farseer, especially compared to Totemic, is that you are sacrificing your healing globals to do damage, meaning that it's a lot harder to heal and do damage at the same time. Whereas Totemic, you know, you just put your Surging Totem down, and that's going to do most of your damage for you while you do whatever else you do. So that was an AoE healing window, but you could also imagine like if you needed to do strong single target healing, like in a Dawnbreaker dungeon, which if you haven't, by the way, I have a Dawnbreaker dungeon guide out that you could go and watch and see how intense the single target healing is needed for that dungeon. It's actually insane. But yeah, so for Farseer, if you needed to do the same thing, but like for a single target healing window, you know, same thing. You would do your Unleash Life, your Ancestral Swiftness, and then you could just go right into a bunch of Healing Surge. And every time you either Riptide or Healing Surge or Healing Wave, these guys are going to pump some pretty big Healing Surges into your target as well. So it feels great. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for like what I would run, like I said, as like a chain heal build and maybe some of the sequence windows. I feel like as people get really good at Farseer, you're going to see a lot more of those sequences evolve. I know some... kind of a secret, but I know some shamans who are working on some really creative things with Farseer, using some spells that we actually don't usually use that much, so that's kind of fun. But anyways, before I sign off, sorry, I know this has been a pretty long video. I would just go into, what maybe a Riptide build would look like, or, rather what I would say a non-chain heal build. So obviously you would take away your high tide, your tidebringer, and your flow of the tides, and then you've basically freed up all of these talent points. So for me, what I would do is I would obviously run torrent, because that is going to enhance all of your riptides and you're going to have a lot of them. Current control I would do, and then I would probably go into Earthen Harmony and run this. But what you could also do is you could, I don't know about this, but you could like take your points out of Spouting Spirits and Current Control, or maybe some of your other talents up here, and you could put them into Undercurrent, because then you're getting, like, 5%, or you're getting like 2.5% healing if you have Riptide on the whole group, which really isn't that much. So I don't know, maybe you wouldn't do that, but I feel like with the Riptide build, the non-chain heal build, because you have so many free talent points from not having to spec into chain heal, there's a lot you could do. So for instance, you could also, if you wanted to, go into deeply rooted elements. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a big fan of RNG based abilities for high-end Mythic Plus, because you can't rely on them. But with deeply rooted elements, with a Farseer Riptide focus build, you have so many Riptides going out all the time that you're more than likely going to proc deeply rooted elements like a lot throughout a dungeon. So it could be worth it from that end. And with your deeply rooted elements, you would just spam Research. I think the drawback and downside from a non-chain heal build, especially for new players, is you don't have a reliable way to pump out a lot of AoE healing easily and quickly. You basically need to be very, very good with Primordial Wave. You need to be very good with your healing rate and your downpours and the timings for all of that in order to really capitalize on what little AoE healing you can do with Farseer. I absolutely believe it's possible. I know that some of the top shamans are going to be running this build with no chain heal, and they're going to do an amazing job with it. So it's absolutely possible. However, I do advise, if you're a new shaman and you're just trying out Farseer, you're probably going to have a better time with the chain heal. Let yourself learn. If you're learning, let yourself learn the easier way to do things first, so that you become effective at it, and so that you know what works and what doesn't, and then you can really start playing around with those min-maxing in terms of what sort of build you want to run, including if you like a no chain heal build. Okay, so that is my Farseer guide. Somehow ended up being longer than my Totemic guide, which I guess, like I said, there's so much more freedom with like the spec talents you can take for Farseer and how they interact with Farseer. It's so cool. And I will just reiterate one more time, I love both of our hero trees. I don't think one is better than the other, in the sense that depending on the content you're running, if you're good at both, it's going to be very clear to you on which one you want to run. And I think they're both very enjoyable in completely different ways, which is, once again, just such great gameplay design. Like, I have to really give it up to Blizzard. Whoever the shaman dev is that made these hero trees, well done. Thank you for taking the feedback during the process. Like, I know, for instance, Totemic had a very dicey way of putting Healing Rain down before they attached it to the totem. So, thank you for taking the feedback, whoever you are, and thank you for designing these amazing trees for us, because we are very much enjoying them, and I think it's just going to be so effective and so much fun going into both Raid and Mythic Plus. All right, so with that, signing off. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.